I wish to thank the organizing committee for giving me the chance to address you today. Due to mitigating personal circumstances, this is still a paper in the making. Your indulgence and feedback will be highly appreciated. Now, there's some change, a modification, let's say, in the title. Druze in the historical writings of Bilad al-Sham, early Ottoman period. This is not working. Is this okay? Is this better? Yes. All right. In this paper, I will review a cross-section of historians of Bilad al-Sham in the early Ottoman period, focusing mainly on biographical dictionaries and chronicles that mention the Druze in any context. I will briefly refer to the Christian parallel negative about the Druze of Mount Lebanon. Islam, the dominant faith in Syria in the Ottoman period, had its exclusive social institutions within which Muslims could lead their lives without interacting with other faiths. Social distinctions arose primarily from the law of the land, which imposed on religious minorities certain disadvantages, keeping them in a subordinate position. With such a restrictive backdrop, communities took to documenting their own histories, creating a deficiency in comparative historical material. Chronicling Druze activities was not among the priorities of Muslim historians, which might explain the near absence of historic documentation on the Druze amidst the plethora of Ottoman sources on Islam. Political preponderance of the Druze in a peripheral region like Mount Lebanon was of no value to Muslim historians of Bilad al-Sham. Christian historians, on the other hand, had vested interest in documenting the history of Mount Lebanon. They recognized the Druze-Maronite Accord was a pillar to Lebanese autonomy under the Ottomans. The Entente would, however, come to an abrupt end with the Civil War of 1860. Christian perspective and narrative became markedly different. What do I do here? Okay, these are the names of the biographical dictionaries, and there's another one. Which one? This one? What, yeah, please do. And there's a continuation. These are not the only ones. There's another page. Yes. Yeah. Okay. In selecting the texts to be reviewed in this paper, I was guided primarily by the understanding of what history meant to or was defined by historians of these centuries. It seemed to me, after reflecting upon these definitions, biography interpenetrated history to the point where terms like tarajim and siyar became anonymous with tarikh. History became the register of notable inhabitants, al-a'yan, of a city or a province or an era. A tribute to those virtuous ancestors became the motive for this genre. Religious scholars, al-ulama, prevailed numerically in biographical dictionaries. In the exclusive Ottoman system of government, they were the only stable element in society whose lives merited documentation and provided, in fact, the history of the Ummah itself. Having set high standards and criteria for inclusion, it becomes clear why no Druze persona is found in those dictionaries, regardless of their prominence in their own locality. Recognized as the heterodox faith, none of their religious scholars would be worthy of inclusion. As a pillar of social order, the Ottomans demanded a domain of obedience in matters religious, public, and private, and religious affiliation of the inhabitants was inscribed within a discourse of loyalty. The most serious rebellion documented in Syria was the one led by the Kurdish Ali Jambulad in collaboration with Fakhruddin ibn Ma'an of the Shuf of Lebanon. Damascus was laid under siege, and their joint forces created havoc in surrounding areas. Al-Hassan al-Burini was quick to label these rebels Khawarij, not only in matters of political, but in matters of religion as well, and readily denounced the defiant Fakhruddin, al-Druze, al-Shaqi, al-La'in, as if one of them is not enough, right? Al-Druze, al-Shaqi, al-La'in. Al-Druze clearly to underscore his apostasy. Burini accused both leaders of trying to establish independent sovereign states. He comments, and I quote, Ibn Ma'an extended his authority where no emir had ever ventured. He exercised unchallenged autonomy in the region. On another occasion, he writes, and I quote, Ibn Jambulad was about to proclaim independence from the Sultanate. قد قرب أن يملك البلاد بالاستقلال. Now, the rebels might have entertained autonomous tendencies, but the word bil istiqlal is an overstated expression, in my opinion. Clearly, the author wanted to accentuate their perfidy. Civil disturbances and rebellions were very frequent in Bilad al-Sham, in Damascus and other major cities, and annals are filled with atrocities committed by Ottoman officials and military. However, the difference in terminology is apparent between Sunni rebels on the one hand and hasharat, vermin, pests of Fakhruddin on the other. The obedient Sunni Saifa, for example, were staunch in support of the Hanafi faith, luminous as gold, in clear contrast to those at-Tughat, al-Bughat, the menacing, decadent tyrants. Moreover, successful campaigns against the Shuf region were designated as Fatih, an expression normally preserved for conquest against the infidels. Burini was not attempting an analysis of the change of causation in this context. He was establishing the depravity of the rebels, hordes of darkness, asakir al-dhulma, and the triumph of the troops of Islam. To him, defying the Sultan is defying God. Muhibbi was more accommodating than most of his colleagues. An entry in his dictionary was devoted to Amir Fakhruddin. His treachery notwithstanding, Muhibbi quoted verse in praise of this rebel and presumed heretic. He admired and commended Mulhim, the nephew of Fakhruddin, and his son Ahmad for their total allegiance, al-inqiyad at-tam, to the Sultanate, deliberately avoiding any reference to their religious affiliations. Tariq Abdul Qadir al-Sawaf remains as the most informative about the insurrection of Ali ibn Jambulad and Fakhruddin. Can we turn to the second page, please? However, he failed to offer a penetrating analysis of these events. Instead, accusing the emir of sodomy and drunkenness was to him compelling reason for the Ottoman authorities to undertake such a costly campaign. Actually, there was skepticism within the Damascene community as to the real motivation behind this punitive expedition. Abdul Qadir ascertains that Sultan Murad was penalizing the emir for his, again I quote, his scandalous behavior. In support of his view, Abdul Qadir formulates a conversation between the Sultan and Fakhruddin. In this allegorical exchange, Fakhruddin reveals to the Sultan the treachery of his agents, and I quote, their lust for wealth compromised the Sultanate and allowed me a free hand fil bilad wal ibad, in the region and its people. The latter conversation is rife with cynical undertones. Submissive and politically undermined by the Ottomans, the author shied away from any direct confrontation with them. It would not be pure conjecture to consider that he conveniently uses the rebel as a medium to deliver a message he was certain will provoke the fury and vengeance of corrupt Damascene officials. Finally, there was those biographers who were not interested in politics. Rather, they directly attacked Druze faith. Al-Urdi and Al-Husayni accused them of sacrilege and heresy. Uphold what they read in their sacred books, Urdi comments, and I quote, God save us. They are full of blasphemy and polytheism, words that can only be uttered by those indisputably without reason. God be praised, we are the true believers. In other words, we are al-Jawahir wal-Durar wa Ma'adin al-Dhahab, as the titles of their dictionaries suggest. These chronicles. There is a long list of chronicles compiled in this period. I will focus only on two that mention Druze, whether in a religious or political context. Ahmad al-Qaramani, Athar al-Duwal wa Akhbar al-Uwal, A Universal History, and Tarikh al-Amir Fakhruddin by Ahmed al-Khalidi al-Safadi. In Akhbar al-Duwal, al-Qaramani challenges the very legitimacy of the Fatimids' right to rule. As Shia, they are dawla or kingdom, not a caliphate. He strongly castigates al-Hakim bi Amrillah, the most venerated imam among the Druze and founder of their faith. Al-Qaramani's partiality can be mitigated by the fact that he was witness to the siege of Damascus by Fakhruddin. With the collective memory still highly charged, he writes, and I quote, "Until this day, there is a large community in Wadi Taim who call themselves Druze. They believe in the reincarnation of Al-Hakim and await his return. These are all false hallucinations. God protect us from Satan." One is tempted to speculate at invoking the name of Satan in this context. Was Qaramani just using the expression أعوذ بالله أو الله ينجينا من الشيطان, or could he be insinuating that Satan is the epitome of the Druze community? Well, I leave it up to you. Ahmed al-Khalidi al-Safadi, a Hanafi mufti and deputy judge, was commissioned by Fakhruddin to write this tarikh as an apology or justification for certain acts committed or thought to have been committed by the emir against the Ottoman Sultanate. The emir probably bestowed upon him such marks of his favor and munificence as to elicit from the author an enthusiastic, panegyric devoid of reproach or any reference to creed. Curiously, in the biographies of al-Khalidi that I had the chance to review, there is no mention of this tarikh among his works. As a member of the ulama, it was probably not to his credit to endorse a rebel and a heretic. Christian historians. Tarikh al-Azbina by the Maronite Patriarch Stefan al-Duwayhi is the only work that fits within the scope of this paper. A totally different Fakhruddin materializes in Duwayhi. He is the tolerant emir, and Christians lived in peace, built churches, and thrived under his hegemony. Two punitive expeditions against the Shuf were completely ignored by Duwayhi to give the impression of a peaceful and tranquil rule during the Ottoman supremacy. Likewise, the siege of Damascus by Fakhruddin and his partisans was briefly reported. Duwayhi's version of that whole episode was intentionally brief to avoid incriminating the emir, among other things. We don't have the time for them now. Now, Christian historians of the 18th and 19th century fall outside the perimeter of this paper. Nonetheless, I will mention a few, if only by name, because they offer an impartial history of the Druze without valued judgment or reference to sectarianism. Works like طنوس الشدياق أخبار الأعيان في جبل لبنان, خطار العنتوريني مختصر تاريخ جبل لبنان, حنانية المنير, الدر المرصوف في حوادث الشوف, attest to a liberal and mutually tolerant atmosphere that prevailed between the mixed communities of Mount Lebanon. However, after the turbulence of 1840 and the Civil War of 1860, a significant change in the attitude of Christian historians becomes apparent. Civil war pitted neighbor against neighbor and forced a sense of communal segregation on a society that up till then had thrived on everyday contact and mixture. Abakarius, in his introduction to Nawadir al-Zaman, stated that the sole purpose of his book was to articulate the injustice that befell the victimized Christians of Mount Lebanon. He blames the Druze for propagating the disturbances and eventual massacres. And I quote, "Alas, what infliction befell the Christians from the nation of the Druze." The headings in the book reflect the deep resentment which Christian historians began to exhibit: acts of injustice, treachery, forced immigration, endless heartless massacres, to cite a few. Curiously, Abakarius was the only one to speak of an ingrained animosity between the communities. He was enthusiastic about the Egyptian occupation of Lebanon and the respite Ibrahim Pasha gave the Christian community. Christian collaboration with the Pasha to end the Druze rebellion of 1838 against the Egyptian added to what he called the bad feeling of old that existed between them and the Maronites. Bakhail Mashaqqa, on the other hand, saw a different approach altogether, and he writes, Christian-Druze relations was really affected by the confiscation of Druze weapons. It was to them worse than death and would later precipitate in the violence that engulfed Mount Lebanon. Shaheen Makarios takes the argument to a different level and reports the joint effort of Druze and Maronites against the Egyptians. I quote, they shared an independent spirit and both fought with equal tenacity and resolve. These historians failed to note that Egyptian occupation changed beyond repair traditional rule in the mountain, displacing traditional muqata'jis, their inherited privileges thwarted, authority over tenants weakened, disrupted the delicate balance between the various communities, adding to confessional antagonism. In conclusion, I reiterate what I started with, that on the whole, Muslim historiography was neither concerned with the Druze community nor the Druze faith. Druze military successes were mere desperate revolts within the parameter of the Sultanate that established their reputation as rebels, nothing more. Historians of Bilad al-Sham of that era were devout Muslims, and the region was never thought of as a separate politico-cultural entity, but part of the Islamic Ummah. That would explain the writer's fervent renunciation of any political disparity or religious discord. Diversity and pluralism were unequivocally shelved when the bond of allegiance to the state was broken. Historians would not hesitate to unleash an arsenal of sardonic adjectives upon the rebels, their faith put to question, and accusations of heresy showered upon them. The presumption of a violence devoid of social cultural meaning is naive. While biographical dictionaries oscillated between inclusiveness and exclusivity, in either case, non-Muslims remain marginal if mentioned at all. As a point of fact, only Muslim ayan, scholars or ulama were deserving of acknowledgement. As for Christian historians, they shared with the Druze their status as minorities in the Ottoman state, which might explain their more indulgent accounts, especially in matters of the faith. True, there was plenty of evident animosity that transpired in the reports of Christian historians, but there was never any reference to religion or criticism of tenets. The confrontations were merely and exclusively geopolitical struggles between two communities, which has always assumed inert, unchanging sectarian identities. The last one, please. I still have. There's still some more. It remains to be said that the Druze have long been part of other people's history. There is no historic reasoning behind the scarcity of material composed by the Druze. Whatever interpretations one might bring up is in the pure conjecture. The cloak of secrecy, which has always veiled their beliefs, made it clearly impossible for their historians to methodically articulate the existence, condition, and vision of their people. Hence, the location, analysis, and ultimately publication of historical Druze sources is required and should be sought after. One case in point is the reluctance to publish up till now the work of Muhammad Malik al-Ashrafani, عمدة العارفين في قصص النبيين والأمم السالفين, despite the richness of its content. Albeit widely quoted by Druze scholars, this work is virtually unknown to others. The value of عمدة العارفين lies in preserving biographies of prominent men who contributed to the propagation and defense of the truth faith. Ashrafani looked beyond factual narrative to an appreciation of the nuance of Tawheed. Two earlier works, Salih ibn Yahya, Akhbar al-Salaf, and Sidq al-Akhbar by Hamza ibn Sbat, are limited in their scope. Salih's targeted audience was his own family. Ibn Sbat included the acclaimed Tarukh dynasty in the margins of his two volumes, which raises two questions. Was it keeping a low profile to avoid riling the Sunni ruling elite? Or more importantly, did Ibn Sbat believe that the Druze were parallel to the mainstream Islam but never part of it? With the scarcity of primary historical compositions, Druze history will remain misinterpreted and misrepresented by ignorant, vengeful, or blundering historians. Thank you. Now, on time, huh? Okay, thank you.